Hello everyone! My name is Jocelyn, you may call me Joy, and today's video is a bit of a continuation from the last one I made that was about defining what a woman is. But this time we're talking specifically about the Labour Party and how they could improve on doing that. So a politician's job is to represent their constituents. This doesn't always happen in practice, but that's the general idea. I think we can all agree on that. So what happens then when the constituents are embroiled in a culture war between trans people just wanting to live our lives as unencumbered as possible, and of course our allies who would like to let us get on and do that, and the evil transphobic TERFs. Oh, sorry, I meant to say
gender critical activists with concerns.
Well, you tend to get politicians who are representatives of the public who also have this, split of opinion. And it does sort of become a bit of a question as to how best to serve the public. As you might expect, most, but not all, of the anti-trans beliefs are held by party members of the conservative traditional values, and the opposition party, again, for the most part, are pro-trans rights. But as I'm about to demonstrate, being a politician is more than just having a live and let live attitude towards trans people. You have to actively provide access to protections and equality within law. This also means allowing us provisions to healthcare and hormones, and sadly it does also mean that you have to be firm on your stance of who gets to use which facilities. Because, that's a thing that politicians need worry about. Not international crises or anything. That's totally not a big deal right now. But because International Women's Day was, very recent thing, a lot of the focus was on women's rights, and defining what a woman is. In the video that I will link below, you can see an interaction between the Conservative MP Bernard Jenkin and the Labour Shadows Equalities Minister Annalise Dodds. Dodds had previously given an interview to a media source, I can't remember which one, where she was asked, not only on behalf of the Labour Party, but also on behalf of herself, how she defines a woman. And the MP, Bernard Jenkin, accuses her of being unable to define it in a clear way. The way she handles this is actually really poor, especially optically, but also just generally. She first of all pivots, asking for evidence of some such quote she might have made, and she accuses him of not fact-checking properly. Another Conservative, Danny Kruger, then produces a quote which she said, "With respect, it does depend what the context is, surely." So she was pushed to give a clearer answer. After doing a little bit of fact-checking, the Conservative MP found Dodds's full answer, which was, and this is Labour's position according to Dodds, quote, "Well, I have to say that there are different definitions legally around what a woman actually is. I mean, you look at the definition within the Equality Act. I think it just says someone who is adult and female. I think, but then it doesn't see how you define either of those things. I mean, obviously then you've got the biological definition, the legal definition." Unfortunately, I don't have the response from Annalise Dodds about what happened after that, because the video cuts off there, but I'm willing to bet that if it took me, a trans person with lots of lived experience and lots of self-taught knowledge about the topic, 20 minutes just to try and define the nuances behind womanhood, then I doubt that she would have been able to do a much better or clearer job given 60 seconds. And again, what she said is true, but a little bit confusing, a little bit vague. She doesn't come off looking very, strong or resolute in any of her answers. In fact, Bernard Jenkins also has this to say about what the Labour leader Keir Starmer said in a previous interview. Quote, "Only women have a cervix is something that shouldn't be said, it's not right." Jenkins calls this a strange way of standing up for women's rights, which wasn't really the question asked specifically of Keir Starmer. He was asked about how to define a woman, not women's rights. These two things get muddled altogether all the time, and that is deliberate. And it is deliberate on the part of the attacker, the accuser. But then Jenkins calls for a government's clear definition of man and woman as enshrined in the Equality Act of 2010. And he said that it must commit to preventing biological men, whatever identity they claim, from gaining access to women-only safe spaces. The question that Jenkins is asking, how to define a woman, is not really the issue. He doesn't want a definition of a woman. Most people already know what a woman is just by looking. He just wants the political opponents to squirm because he knows that it's difficult to define. The question is not being asked in good faith, and repeatedly so. This is in fact sea lioning. For those of you that are not aware, sea lioning is a tactic that is a type of trolling or pursuing people with persistent requests for evidence or repeated questions while maintaining the pretense of civility and sincerity. It may take the form of incessant bad faith questions or invitations to engage in debate. Let's talk a little bit about another Labour critic who keeps crawling out of the woodwork, J.K. Rowling. All J.K. Rowling had to do was shut the fuck up, and she could have been almost uncritically beloved for like a century. Oh wait, that argument's already been made, and it would have been pretty valid had it not been followed by ironic misogyny. But I'm not getting involved in that can of worms. Absolutely not. Not in this video anyway. Leave a comment down below if you would like to hear my thoughts about that whole situation, because there are some things that I think haven't been said yet. J.K. Rowling says Keir Starmer misrepresents law over woman definition. The Labour Party can no longer be counted on to defend women's rights, says the author. J.K. Rowling has accused Keir Starmer of publicly misrepresenting the equalities law in what she says is yet another indication that the Labour Party can no longer be counted on to defend women's rights. The Harry Potter author was responding to comments the Labour leader gave to The Times when asked to define a woman. Starmer, formerly the Director of Public Prosecutions, the most senior prosecutor in England and Wales, said, "A woman is a female adult, and in addition to that, trans women are women, and that is not just my view, that is actually the law. It has been the law through the combined effects of the 2004 Gender Recognition Act and the 2010 Equality Act." Now, all of that is in fact true. He called for reforms to the Gender Recognition Act, under which people diagnosed with gender dysphoria who have lived in their acquired gender for at least 2 years can apply to be legally recognised. The process that people have to go through does need to be looked at, he told The Times. If you talk to anybody who's been through the process, there's a real issue about respect and dignity. Again, true. On Saturday, Rowling said in a tweet, "I don't think our politicians have the slightest idea how much anger is building among women from all walks of life, and the attempts to threaten and intimidate them out of speaking publicly about their own rights, their own bodies, and their own lives." How does recognising trans people do any of that? She has drunk the turf Kool-Aid. She's made it so much a part of herself now that that's all she can think of. Among the thousands of letters and emails I've received are disillusioned members of Labour, the Greens, the Lib Dems and the SNP. Women are scared, outraged and angry at the deaf ear turned to their well-founded concerns. But women are organising. And of course she's received thousands of letters. She's made herself a public figurehead for this talking point and this, political point of view. You don't have to spit very far before you find that you've in fact enraged a transphobe. Now, Keir Starmer publicly misrepresents equalities law in yet another indication that the Labour Party can no longer be counted on to defend women's rights. But I repeat, women are organising across party lines and their resolve and their anger are growing. Rowling said innumerable gay people had written to her saying they felt under attack. She said, like women, they, especially lesbians, are under attack for not wishing to be redefined and for refusing to use ideological language they find offensive. But upholding equalities law doesn't strip away women's rights. And how is anyone under attack from acknowledging trans people exist? Rowling still hasn't provided enough evidence or reasonable justification to make that claim. Under the 2004 Gender Recognition Act in England and Wales, a transgender person is legally recognised as their acquired gender only after they have received a gender recognition certificate, but the Equality Act 2010 provides protection for trans people who have not yet transitioned or obtained a GRC. Section 7 of the Act provides protection to anyone with the protected characteristic of gender reassignment, defined as anyone who is proposing to undergo, is undergoing, or has undergone a process or part of a process for the purpose of reassigning the person's sex by changing physiological or other attributes of sex. The Equality Act also allows providers of separate or single-sex services to provide a different service to or exclude someone who has the protected characteristic of gender reassignment, including those with or without a GRC, provided that the service providers can prove it is a proportionate means of achieving legitimate aim. What that means is gender is still not recognised without any kind of physical transition, and it also means that businesses can be biased and bigoted and exclude trans people. You see why us trans people want more protection under the law. What I don't see here is how that's a problem for regular cis women, lesbians, gays, Labour Party people, Green Party people, or anyone that Rowling has already mentioned. In the Times interview, Starmer called for a more considered, respectful, tolerant debate about these issues, adding, "I don't think it furthers the interests of anybody to continue the debate in the way that it's been going on now for some time." Which I think using the word debate was a very bad mistake, because it kind of lends legitimacy to all of these concerns. And I delved in further detail on Keir Starmer's women with a cervix comment in another video about trans women in women's spaces, which is also really relevant to this topic. So what's happened here is that both Sir Keir Starmer and Annalise Dodds have tried to include trans people in the definition of woman by not focusing too much on the biological aspects of femaleness. This is a messy topic, and it took me 20 minutes to define what a woman is in my previous video. It's not something that you can just snapshot and quote easily. However, when someone says the phrase
adult human female,
it's snappy, it's easy to remember, it kind of makes a logical, consistent sense, except when you remember that gender is in fact not the same as biological sex, and the way that we treat gender in society is also not the same way we treat biological sex. Trans men exist. Trans men with a cervix exist. Trans women who are women do not have a cervix, but they still exist. So at least we now know the importance of being able to define what a woman is, because when confronted with this difficult question, the opposition will attack, the public thinks you look weak, wishy-washy, or uninformed. And the transphobes get their own way by sounding reasonable enough to then justify excluding trans people from their definitions of what woman and man are. And by the way, that video, I mean, don't read the comments because they are awful. But I did post something and I said that it really highlights the importance of politicians needing to defer to experts in certain cases, because a politician's job, you know, I don't want to say anything too negative about politicians in general, but it is a politician's job to know a little about a lot. Some of them do specialise in certain areas. I know that the representative for my area, Rebecca Powell, has a vested interest in soil preservation, which is great. She's, you know, well done. We like that environmental aspect to her career. I wish her all the best on that. Shame she's a conservative and has other, you know, terrible views. But my point is that a politician cannot be expected to be a gender academic expert or even a trans person with lots of lived experience. So when Sir Keir or when Annalise Dodds try to answer the question as best they can, they end up falling short because they're not experts. And this then gets criticised and ripped to shreds. And asking questions of people who aren't experts is a bad faith tactic, no matter how you look at it. But if you want an answer to what a woman is, then just look at my video. If you want to keep asking questions in bad faith, go ahead and ask a Labour politician, because they aren't as well versed on the topic as me. I hate to call myself an expert, but I have done a lot of research on the topic and I have a lot of lived experience. I can give you no better definition than this. Woman is a social role, not biologically defined as the word female, although in much of human history the two things have been aligned. When people call me she or her, it's not because they know that I have certain anatomy, it's because they assume whatever it is that they assume. The fact that I use they, them pronouns doesn't even enter their heads until I tell them that. Perception is reality. How a person is seen and treated in society definitely defines who that person is more than we would like. Our lived experience does in fact inform our perspective. And as I said in the other video, the truth does lie within the interplay between personal identity and social roles and presentation. Anyway, I hope that's been illuminating for you, and until next time, be nice to women. All women, please. And men. And of course, non-binary people. Because we are hecking valid. Ooh ooh. Bye. What do I normally say? I forgot my intro. All J.K. Rowling had to do was shut the fuck up, and she could have been almost uncritically... Ha!